Okay, James, I don't know who James is.
I'm gonna put in the chat, who they are. Recognize it there.
Susan, when the names are listed, can we do a
I'm
screen?
sorry?
When the names are eventually listed on the right,
Okay.
can you do a
It looks
screenshot,
like
that way
I
you're
can't
not
do it now.
feverishly
We
writing,
can do that.
huh?
For whatever reason, Brad,
Brad, eventually, can't we get a list of the names all the way to the right where they're listed down? And then we can do a screenshot of the names?
Yeah, Brad, can you pull up?
And that way we can just do a
Okay,
screenshot,
yep, you're right.
and, we'll have it. Be easier for Susan.
okay, who's that phone number? 7901. I'm shitty.
All right, so you said G. Let's go back.
Wasn't allowed.
It was pretty clear. Yeah, March. So I really.
No Boston? And has everybody in the audience signed in over here?
Oh, where?
Out the door.
Oh, you signed up for this. Sorry, double sign in.
Double sign in.
I need to get my stamp. Huh? You mean on, yeah,
No, looks like she got a
you know what, Sharon?
Yeah, she talked about it.
Sarah Lucas.
Oh, that's Gina.
Oh, hi, Gina.
With the mask, you look like Karen.
Yeah.
Oh.
Some people.
I know Karen. Yeah.
Hey, Marsh.
Although her hair is a little longer, Karen.
Well, I thought maybe she got a cut. I mean,
Yeah,
it looks nice, your hair looks really nice, Gina.
I have had two compliments today since I walked into this building. Having a good hair day. First one. Thanks very much.
And I thought, there's a lady, or a consultant actually, she's dark hair, and I thought, you guys have the same shape, and I thought, God, is Karen get her hair cut? It looks nice.
Yeah, so I guess technically, since we have two, that's a quorum of it. So I guess we could go ahead and,
Wait,
Yeah.
a second.
With Todd, there'll be about 20 minutes late.
okay, that's fine.
Yeah,
Did you hear from Bob today at all?
Yeah, I called Bob, I talked to him this morning. What if he's just stuck in traffic? Yeah, maybe. Usually. So I could, since Bob has already seen the rules, I could. Yeah, I think he's up on those, so you could probably start without him on that, yeah. Y'all are okay with that? Okay. So just a few, housekeeping, the people online can hear us, right, yes.
Yeah.
Just a few housekeeping before we get started. We will have a public comment period at the end, and, we do have little cards. Hi, Bob.
Sorry, I'm late.
That's okay. We do have little cards on the table back there for those who are in person, who would like to, fill out a card, and speak. Just, give them to Brad Johnson, and you can do that at any point. Give them to Brad during the meeting. And then also, those who are on Zoom, if you would like to speak during the public comment period, you can, type in your name and just say you have a public comment. They will be, 2 minutes. And then we'll also pause after that point for those, in case there's anybody on the phone who can't write in the chat, who would like the public comment, we'll have that available as well. And also, if you are online, Susan, do you know everybody, you have everybody's name, or do you need, if you have a phone number that you've called in with, if you can email Susan Schumacher your name so she can, get that in the minutes, that would be great. But other than that, I think that's all of our housekeeping, so I will.
I got 2 items, if I may.
Go for it.
James, I don't know James.
Could everyone turn off their cell phones? Usually something I forget to do. And 2, could you speak loudly? Something I forget to do. Thank you.
So, I thought the best way to start would be introductions, since a lot of people at the table have not met, each other before. So, Chuck, do you want to start, and we'll just go around the table?
Sure. I'm Chuck Yonker. I'm the Director of the Waste Management Division for Hamilton County Public Health.
Yifang Chen, Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office, Counsel to Solid Waste.
Magna, City of Cincinnati Representative.
I'm Bob Getter, the public member of the Policy Committee.
Brad Johnson, the Director of Hamilton County Environmental Services. Jeff Nivy with the Hamilton County Engineers Office, Traffic Department.
And Jeff, you said Todd is going to be about 20 minutes
Yeah.
late. He's also with engineers.
Yes, he's also.
Susan Schumacher, I'm with the Hamilton County Resource.
Michelle Balt, Hamilton County Resource.
Tony DeCuccio, I'm on the Policy Committee as the generator representative, I believe.
I'm Sharon Lutz. I'm a resident of Whitewater Township. I own and operate Green Acres Kayak Rental, and I'm navigator for We Thrive in Whitewater Township.
Hi, I'm Kirsten Jones, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Coordinator for Hamilton County Public Health.
It's all right with you. I was going to just do a couple slides similar to our policy committee, just to get everybody on the same page as far as what the rules are. So you can actually go to the first rules slide. They probably don't need to have a background on the policy committee. So, this is, just the, what is in our solid waste plan right now. So our current solid waste plan started in 2018, and it, just is a list exactly of what language we have in there about rules. So we, in the plan have that, the board of directors, so the board of directors is the Board of County Commissioners, has at this time decided to not put rules, but we do not waive the authority to make, publish, or enforce rules. So the Board of Directors can publish rules, according to solid waste. And so there's 4, you can go on, Brad. So there's 4 areas that Ohio Revised Code says that, solid waste districts can write rules in. And I have, I'm sorry for printing, but when you're looking at Ohio Revised Code, there's really no better way to look at it than if it's printed. But this is, what I handed out. These are the rules. They're available on Ohio's, state's website. But, this is actually from the Ohio EPA solid waste plan format, so it's a little bit of a much better condensed, easier to read version. So there's 4 areas that solid waste districts can write rules. 1 is prohibiting or limiting the receipt of waste generated outside the solid waste district. This is the rule that actually has the most description of how to go about this, and this would be if, in the case where we did not have sufficient landfill capacity, the solid waste districts could say, we don't have enough landfill capacity, private landfill, you are not allowed to take waste from outside of our district. We are not in that situation, and there is, that's like I said, the most detail on that first rule. The second rule is governing the maintenance, protection, and use of solid waste collection, transfer, disposal, or resource recovery facilities, so basically any solid waste facility. That, I believe, is what we are here to talk about more today. If you look, that is the next biggest section. It's this big paragraph on the back. And really that is, when you look through this, where Hamilton County would say, we would like to look at the plans for any solid waste facility before it expands or before it gets built. Then the last 2, just to go over it quickly, The third one is, creating a program to inspect out-of-state waste. And then the last one is that we could, basically go over the head of a local municipality that, a solid waste facility was being built in and say that they are exempt from the local zoning requirements. Please remember that these were written in the late 80s, and solid waste capacity in the late 80s was a big problem. So that is really written so that solid waste districts could get a landfill in their county for that reason. So this is just looking at that second rule a little bit closer. That's in what I have printed for you. But like I said, it's really looking at the general plan. So this was a presentation I gave to the commissioners earlier this week. That's why it has all that extra stuff in there. So that's all I really had about the rules. I just kind of wanted to get everybody on the same page with kind of what we were talking about, but then I wanted to hand it over to the subcommittee. So I'll let you, you three take it.
Well, Bob and Susan, my thought was the first thing we probably need to do is to decide sort of a committee structure, who's going to chair the committee, and throw that out there for discussion at this point. I'm willing to do that, but obviously we haven't talked about this at all.
Right. I'm perfectly fine with Tony chairing.
Okay, if so you don't want to?
I'll be a vocal person in the subcommittee, but I don't desire to be chair.
Okay. Okay, if you don't desire it, then.
I feel I can be more vocal by not being a chair.
Okay, gotcha.
All right, do we need to make any formal vote, or?
What do you think, Tom? Do they need to vote? No, I don't think so.
Okay. All right, so, how do I think about this?
I nominate Tony to be chair of the subcommittee.
Okay, I'll second that.
There you go.
Thank you, Bob. I guess now you want me to take over the
Yes.
rest of the agenda,
Yes,
right?
please.
The fourth agenda item on our agenda today is any questions coming from us on the subcommittee on it. I'll open up Bob, you, and Susan to pursue it. Go ahead. Yeah. I don't know how far along we can get in this discussion. I kind of see this as a very preliminary start, I guess, in terms of trying to put some structure to how we're going to proceed ahead, what's going to really be the overall scope of our endeavor here. Particularly the scope, I think, is particularly important. We haven't had any discussion about, for instance, I was thinking about what disposal facilities does this cover, what we even, and that could be a broad range of facilities from, it could be any facility that takes any kind of waste, because many materials going in any facility really are often classified as a waste. The waste coming out the back end and going in the front end, they certainly are. So I'll open it up to you, Sue, and to you, Bob, about what your thoughts are on that.
I think I have questions on item number 4 and number 5, and just you open it up with exactly where I'm starting from. What does the district govern over? What types of facilities? And Michelle, this is a wonderful summary from Ohio Revised Code, and it does help. I mean, this is a good starting point. But from a district's perspective, from a policy committee's perspective, what disposal facilities are encompassed? But what do we? And I use the term govern loosely. What do we govern over, or what do we have oversight over?
Right.
This discussion started with one facility, one particular facility, but I opened it up with what types of facilities. Are we talking closed landfills, open landfills, transfer stations, and beyond.
Right.
So it's an open-ended question.
So you probably know, we contract with, Hamilton County Public Health and the Cincinnati Health
Yeah.
Department to kind of be the regulatory arm, so to speak, of the solid waste district. So they do the required inspections. So I would pass it off to Chuck to explain a little bit more about what facilities.
Types of facilities, sure.
Yeah.
Obviously municipal solid waste landfills, Rumpke Sanitary Landfill, Bond Road Landfill, transfer stations, Evendale, Republic operates a transfer station in Evendale. So those are the solid waste facilities. Also under solid waste would be compost facilities.
I was wondering if that was included.
Yes, it is, and there's about a dozen of those. Most of them are municipal or township leaf, compost. They're yard waste only. There's no class twos that we regulate. The city of Cincinnati does have, I believe, a class two.
Finley Market,
At
yeah.
Finley Market. So.
Now, what, and I want you to continue, but
Sure.
on the compost facilities, what are you defining as regulated there?
So the feedstock, so the type of material that's composted at that type of facility. They have 4 different classes
Yes.
of compost, facility that you can operate. Class 4 being the simplest and really less, nuisance, prone. So those are yard waste only.
Right.
And then class 3, I think you step up, you might be able to take manure in and compost manures. Class 2 is food waste, and class 1 would be municipal solid waste,
Right.
composting municipal solid waste.
And for clarification,
Yes.
a compost site has to be larger than what size before you
I think
regulate
it's
it?
400 square foot,
500
500 square foot, the
So if it's-
threshold.
Because there's a lot of them under 500 square feet now that are.
That's particularly where I was getting at.
Even if they fall below that threshold, there is a requirement that they don't create a nuisance, meaning they're
Yeah.
not stinking, attracting, flies, other vectors. So yeah, there's an inspection program for these types of facilities. And
Yeah.
these are mainly the solid waste facilities. We also address open dumping, unlicensed facilities operating, also nuisance situations. And those a lot of times are just homeowners not managing their waste properly on their property. So more in a confined environment, and accumulations of waste or improperly stored outside. Scrap tires would be the other, program that we have under solid waste. And we, work with the sheriff's office, actually Brian Peak is here. We work with retailers of tires to make sure that those tires are stored, shipped, and disposed of properly. There's a registration requirement if you transport more than 10 tires. That's to ensure that we don't have people hauling tires and dumping them somewhere. The sheriff's office and any police station or any police officers could pull over anyone hauling more than 10 tires and make sure that they are registered, with the state, with Ohio EPA, to make sure that those tires are going to a receiving facility that can accept them and not being dumped. So we do, inspections of the retailers, to make sure that they are stored, that their paperwork is accurate, and, that their storage doesn't create, mosquito harborage nuisance for us. Those are the main programs. I can dive in a little bit
Chuck,
deeper.
just to, I think, to clarify for
Sure.
people, so, you're basically authorized by the Ohio EPA to enforce regulations. Do you have any separate regulations that Ohio EPA has in terms of ones that come directly out of the county health department?
We have an environmental sanitation code, but it's more for the and the residential properties. So how storage of waste is conducted, leak-proof, watertight, rodent-proof, containers outside. Those kind of things are outlined in the environmental sanitation code from 1947 that is still in effect, and it was written quite well and gives us a lot of liberty to interpret that rule and how that situation, and we work with people. We're not out to get people. We try to educate and we try to, people to comply. with some minimum standards so that, you know, they get along with their neighbors. And that's quite often what the situation is, it's a neighbor dispute, so we do get into plenty of those.
So the health department follows Ohio EPA rules and regulations.
Yeah.
You're authorized by Ohio EPA to do enforcement.
We're known what
I can't remember the term.
is known as a, approved health district, yeah.
Okay.
So-
And not every health district in Ohio is approved.
Right, we're subject to annual audits and really a continual dialogue with the district office of Ohio EPA. But an annual review of our inspections, they accompany us on inspections and ensure that we are citing as they would cite. So they establish the standards and then they review our program to make sure that we're following those standards established by.
I do want to point out that Chuck didn't mention construction and demolition because, C&D is not considered solid waste under Ohio. But you do that separately from our.
Whole separate, ORC and OAC that are involved with that program.
Does that mean that C&D we're not allowed to touch it, or he can't touch it? No, he does touch it, we don't. Okay. So really, I think what it comes down to is they have exempted C&D from the definition of solid waste.
Yeah.
So when we, say our diversion rate is 56%, it doesn't include any C&D. We're not allowed to report C&D diversion. It's considered a completely separate waste stream. So, yeah, it's just a strange exemption.
So I see a very large amount of workload on Chuck's shoulders there, and a lot of regulatory authority there, and a lot of files there too, on workload there. What does the policy committees?
Can we get, before we get off on that, one thing I was gonna say is,
Two other facilities.
in terms of the type of facility, I think if you look at the plan, the solid waste management plan for the county, it covers a broad range of facilities.
Yes.
And so the other question I think I had for Chuck was, what about recycling facilities?
Good question.
We do not regulate recycling facilities.
And then what about other alternative disposal operations besides composting,
Anaerobic digestion,
Yeah, I think
biochar.
Yeah, anaerobic digestion falls under Division of Surface Water, under Ohio EPA's programs. Biochar, I'm not sure where that would, not that familiar with it. I'm guessing that's heating organic matter to a point where it's
Yeah, exactly.
charcoal kind
Yeah.
of, yeah. I don't know of any of those operations and who would have authority on those as well.
Okay.
Product, so if it's not a waste, we don't necessarily get involved.
Okay.
I can tell you on the air side, that, the biodigesters do have to, obtain air permits through, environmental services, our Southwest Ohio Air Quality. Currently, we only have the one facility, which I know the policy committee's aware of.
So for recycling facilities, I mean, is that considered a solid waste facility though? That would be a question for Ohio EPA. I would consider it, but I think we'd have to clarify that. Okay. I mean, it says in that language, resource recovery. Right, and I kind of assumed it meant all that EMB and MERS and all this, but yeah, I want to know if those are under this jurisdiction or not. And I guess C&D is explicitly excluded.
Yeah.
C&D landfills.
C&D landfills, there's also,
C&D processing center.
there's proposed rules for C&D processors as well. They're not finalized yet.
So that would be, is your impression that if that new regulation goes through, it'd be sort of in the same classification as a C&D landfill, and that would not be under the solid waste umbrella, it would be separated out under C&D? I know.
Right, yeah, the type of waste kind of indicates what you fall into. It's either designated as a solid waste or a construction and demolition debris.
Brad, I put you on the spot, I guess. Do any of the C&D landfills, are they required to get air permits?
Currently,
I don't believe any of them do. It depends on
They do.
there are some, oh, yes, actually, there are, you're
For
right.
roadways.
For roadways, for dust control.
Dust control, and then if they have processing equipment, they would need air permits for those for the diesel engines on them and, dust generated from processing construction debris, it's the dusty operation. Can't
Same thing as the solid waste facilities, they have those as well, plus on top of that, they have the gas.
And, while we're going down that pathway, stormwater regulations are, that's a direct enforcement by Ohio EPA, if they're required to get it.
Yeah, a lot of them fall under some general
General
permits,
permit,
yeah.
I just have the, overarching question. The large amount of facilities that Chuck has authority over, regulatory, and how does the district interact on that? How does the district have any rulemaking authority on that large amount of categories of facilities, or is there restrictions on the district?
You mean hypothetically, if we were to make rules?
Hypothetically, and I don't have any proposed activities at this time. This is an investigative question.
Can you restate the question a second?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can repeat it exactly, you know, but I guess my overarching question is, what is the reach of the district, on, rulemaking authority for all the facilities that Chuck's office, encompasses?
All the facilities we just mentioned.
That was just mentioned, yes.
Got it.
The rule that, the law, rather, that, Michelle just went over, it's pretty broadly written.
It is.
Exactly.
Type of facility. But one thing to point out there is that the districts are not authorized to establish design standards. Those are solely in the purview of Ohio EPA. Unless that changes, unless the state law changes, that's an area that, you know, we cannot require more stringent design standards than what Ohio EPA, or Latin standards either.
Philosophically, where I'm coming from is not design or, operations, but, well, perhaps operations, but, protection of surrounding, residents in the area. So it's more in the governance of the facility. And it gets into, item number 5 on our agenda. And so it may, some of the items that I'm thinking of may impact most of most of the facilities that Chuck is bringing up, but it depends on how the facility is being operated and how it may impact the design of the facility as well too, but not necessarily, the physical design, but rather the footprint of the facility and how the footprint impacts the neighborhood. So I'm not sure I'm explaining myself in that large sense. When we get into specifics, I can explain myself better.
Can I just say that there are already established rules
Yeah.
for each type of facility. Ohio EPA has the rule writing authority
Yes.
broadly and goes through a pretty rigorous process to get those rules hammered out, working with the industry that's involved and is being regulated, public noticing, receiving comments, being responsive to those comments, and then, you know, filing those rules as final with KCAR.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that rulemaking process.
Yes.
And as we get into, next steps, I guess what I'm missing in my knowledge base is, some of the, regulatory requirements of today, because I was very familiar with the regulatory requirements of 20 years ago. And so, and we need to be aware of what the regulatory requirements of today are, and see if they are sufficient protection of the surrounding areas. And so I feel some, research is needed to bring us up to speed. So,
Well, those will vary by facility type.
exactly,
Yeah.
very much so, very much so.
Most of these are located in chapter 374527. And reorganized a lot of them into a 500 series from there. So most of them are, like tires is 60, and, solid waste landfills, 19 is operations for solid waste facility operations. But they're all available on Ohio EPA's website. They've got them broken down by program, and then there's a rules page or rules tab for each program, so you can locate them fairly quickly and come up to speed on it.
What chapter did you quote there?
It's Ohio Administrative Code, chapter 3745-27. Kind of the route, and then you go on from there from the different programs. Sure.
Excellent. Little homework there.
Yep.
Yeah, and kind of just identifying which ones are still operating on the 1945, and which ones have been adapted based on climate change.
Yeah, exactly. So, leading from this discussion onward, what about closed landfills? Are they being inspected by your group?
So yeah, under contract with solid waste districts, we keep an eye on the closed landfills, and there's, several dozen
Yes.
closed landfills. I mean, Cincinnati's an old, established town, and each town had a dump. St. Bernard, or Elmwood Place had one.
I remember Alda.
We've got a pretty comprehensive, report that we, produce each year, and we are doing some gas sampling at some facilities that don't have an explosive gas monitoring plan. And we also do surface water sampling above and below, looking for any change, any difference between the two of any facilities that are located near a body of water. So, I can share with you those results. I think it's been a while since we updated our website, but we do have a report from 2020 that we can put out on the website and make it available. But it really is a summary of the file that we have for each facility, and then any monitoring activities that we're engaged in on those facilities. So, looking at neighboring properties, looking for explosive gas pathways that may potentially accumulate in a dwelling and become an explosive hazard. We're trying to make sure that doesn't happen by doing routine monitoring.
Chuck, I did just pull it up here on the website.
Okay,
It looks like 2019. is
Yeah, I don't
the
think I put 20 out there yet, but we can put the 20 out there.
How many, closed landfills are being monitored for, gas?
Go to the last page of that, would you, Brad, because I don't know off the top of my head. I've got a staff that, you guys say Chuck, but it's Chuck and Tony and Nick and Emily. I got two Emilys, so, it's not just me. So there's our schedule for, monitoring.
I'm gonna share the screen real quick.
Okay.
Green ones in the bottom there. There you go.
I think it's down one, there you go. Nope.
Which one is it?
Middle left. No.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
There you go.
There you go. Now everybody can see it.
So visual inspections are the V, where we'll look for settlement, dead vegetation, which would indicate some gas migrating to the surface. S's are surface water sampling that we do, and then gas is the G in those columns. So there's the list. How many that is? 30-something.
Hey, Chuck, let me ask you just a very general question, not an exact, number, but on that list, how many of those sites are percentage basis, publicly owned versus privately owned? 80% are publicly owned sites?
Yeah, I'd say that's about right, Tony. Yeah.
And of any of those sites altogether, are there any that are sort of what I call orphaned, and that the owners are not, can't locate them, or they're not, they're not taking, bonding to you on any issue?
No, I don't know that we have too many orphaned, if any. Some of them have been redeveloped, into parks. Oak Park in Wyoming is a former landfill. It's also the location of their compost facility on top of the northern portion of that.
The one on Glenway is a shopping center now.
Yeah, Glenway and Crookshank, yep.
Yeah.
So, Cincinnati Millicron had one where the Lowe's is in Pleasant Ridge, or Columbia Township. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these have been repurposed, some with some engineering to prevent, explosive hazards from gas that might be, accumulating. But yeah, we try to look at those on a routine basis to make sure nobody gets hurt. That's our role.
Good to hear.
Yeah, I don't know anybody else in the state that's doing this. So we've put a lot of effort to this, to have a handle on them and make sure that, there's some monitoring of them to ensure that.
How can I find that report then on the internet?
It's on our website, Hamilton County Public Health, hcph.org. Search for landfill, that'll pull up our landfill page. That's
Hamilton County Ohio closed landfill report.
Or
Oh,
type
good.
that in. There you go.
That's easy. Okay.
But I'll get the 2020 out there. I apologize. It's been a busy year.
Okay.
Falling off on getting reports out to the web. Got some updates to do. Sorry.
Okay. Sounds good.
Bob, any other questions on that type of facility?
Anything from Sue?
No,
No?
nothing additional.
I think we've been exploring, the questions on rules, and that may be an ongoing question as we move into other meetings as well. But I wanted to explore number 5, the, subcommittee questions on disposal facility governance. I kind of think that's related, to the question on rules as well, too. And that is, it allows me to get into more specific questions, on the disposal facility governance, and may require, some more subject matter expertise questions too, I'm curious about, litter abatement, on the active landfills and how that's monitored. That might be in Chuck's court too, or somebody's court. How is that, abated so that it's not a nuisance to neighbors around an active landfill?
There's rules for that. I forget exactly what.
I know that the state has rules.
Quoted, yeah.
But how is that's an issue that always requires constant monitoring, and I know the landfill operators have staff that deal with that.
Yeah.
But how does the county react to that issue,
Scattered litter,
Just the daily, on a windy day, yesterday was a pretty windy day, how does that, do you react to neighborhood complaints, or is there a regular inspection for litter abatement? How's that happen?
litter is assessed during a routine inspection, which are conducted minimum 2 times a month. We're out there for a routine, full, comprehensive inspection, which would include litter controls. And controls would be litter fencing. They have these structures that are a metal frame that they place near the working face. They place it on the downwind side. These metal structures have a net that catches the litter that flows off the working face. They also have laborers that are hired on a temporary basis to come in, pick hillsides that litter has escaped the litter fencing. It's a constant daily effort at a landfill. I mean, if you've got an exposed area and there's these grocery bags that will loft and take off and travel, even a mile or so sometimes, it takes diligent effort to control that. Part of it is covering the waste. They they certainly need an area open to put incoming loads, that we ask to be the smallest practical area,
Yeah.
that they can safely operate. We don't want people getting hurt. This is a very dangerous operation. These machines weigh tens of thousands of tons and can squash a person, you know, like that. So, practical, small area, for the incoming volume, and, covering that as part of the litter control.
The open space is what you're speaking of there, and, in some states, they regulate the open space depending on the wind speed, and one state in particular, they close landfills when it's 40 miles per hour or more, in wind speed. That's not an Ohio EPA regulation, but have you, seen any problems when the wind speed's that high, and is there any issues discussed about, wind speed versus litter abatement, or any connection like that?
Really, it's left to the operator to anticipate, storm events that they're gonna kick up waste. Some of it could be, you know, where they locate the working face that month, that week, that day,
Yeah.
To shelter from the prevailing winds that might be coming.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's very dynamic, it moves every day.
Yeah.
It's not something that we have a prescribed 40 miles per hour, you have to be this small, or
Yeah.
you have to close, because that would cause a backup of the whole waste stream.
Oh, yes.
That,
Oh, yes.
we really don't want. Yeah.
Yeah.
So currently, there's no rule, I'm sorry, I just don't
No,
want to interrupt.
absolutely.
So currently, there's no rule by Hamilton County Solid Waste as far as covering the open space at the end of the operating hours?
So there's a rule to, I'm sorry, there's a rule to cover, the waste with daily cover, which would be,
Each night, yeah.
each night. However, Rumpke is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week facility, so there is no,
There's no end of day.
it's not closed ever. It's always open and receiving waste. There's commercial loads that come in at night.
Can the amount of the size of the
They-
open
they
space
limit it to
be
the-
restricted? Because I'm also concerned about being not covered, so much of a large open space, that we also get the odors that come drifting down out the hills that come down along the river
Right.
into the valley.
I think Ohio EPA's regulation is, a full cover at the end of each close of business day.
Correct.
And so, like you mentioned, they're 24/7.
Yeah, and with that, it could be additional waste that's placed on top of the waste from yesterday, and that's covered. I mean, that's kind of applies as covered.
So waste on waste cover?
It is, yeah,
Okay.
technically, if they're building one lift, and then within that 24-hour period, they come in with the next lift over the top of it, it's been covered. That waste hasn't been exposed for more than 24 hours.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult inspection point, because we've gone out and taken photographs and had to identify waste in the waste mass, come back 24 hours later. If that waste is still exposed, if we can identify that couch or that, whatever, then we can issue a violation. If not, if it's been covered with additional waste or with soil, then they've met that obligation of the daily cover.
So Sharon, to answer your question is, there is a rule, there is a regulation, it's not county-based, it's state-based.
But we could tweak upon that here with the subcommittee.
That's a question yet to be answered, I think. That's
Yeah,
a good
I mean-
question, it really is. Because you're gonna get into this discussion of, is that a design standard?
Yes. Yeah.
That cover that is placed, though, before the next lift goes in, if it's soil, it needs to be stripped off. You can't just leave that layer of soil in there, it becomes a restrictive layer, and you won't have, free conveyance of the leachate to the leachate collection system at the bottom of the landfill, in the bottom of the cell. So, they may be covering over here, but they may be stripping over here. All of these generate some odors. I mean, that's just the fact that comes with landfills. They limit that as much as possible, confine that exposed waste to the smallest practical area.
Chuck, and don't ever hesitate to say, Tony, you're wrong. But there's sort of three things I was thinking about. I call it the three things that are probably of most impact neighbors are, potential impact neighbors at landfills, and frankly, at other non-landfill facilities, are litter, potentially birds, and potentially mud. And it's, I would describe it as more as a performance-based standard that, so if trucks inspectors go to a transfer station, and they see that, well, you've got litter all over the place here because you've had winds and maybe the waste was too close to where the door was, so it's blowing. And so it's a judgment call in some cases. And you can have birds. You can have birds at transfer stations, usually not mud at transfer stations, all paved typically, but it's more a performance-based thing. That's why the inspections are important. Folks will go out there, and I'm assuming if you get a complaint, then you send somebody out and look at it and say, okay, usually it's going in and saying, go look at it, and they go over to the landfill owner, even if it doesn't, transfer station owner, even if it doesn't rise to a potential violation. My experience has been that not just here but elsewhere, they'll go in and they'll talk to the landfill manager and say, we've got a complaint. I looked at it. I'm not sure it comes to a level of issuing a formal violation, but can you please take care of this right away? Most of the facility operators are going to respond to that very quickly. And then over the long term, who's ever doing the inspections, they'll monitor that. They'll keep a record of, oh, is this a reoccurring problem or not? Not so, it's not like going out there every week, but it's like, you know.
I think, your summary of performance standards is very good. I like that. But I would like to dive into a design standard issue. And that is a question of authority too. And that is buffers around an active landfill or an active solid waste facility of any sort. I find, and I do want to learn about what Ohio EPA requires on buffers. I need to learn the current standard. I know the standard from 20 years ago, but I need to learn what the current standard is. So
I'm not real familiar with the current.
Yeah, so
those are PCI related.
Yeah, between now and the next meeting, I'll find out, okay? But, the buffers directly impact the neighbors of a neighboring, of a facility. And so the intent of a buffer, and buffers can be of many different constructions, but buffers create a barrier between the facility and the neighborhood. And a buffer could be an earthen mound, a buffer could be a row of trees, could be a fence line. It can be many different forms of construction, and it's in the design, it's in the original design of the facility, and sometimes a modification here and there when we find that the buffer is not adequate. And my point is, if there's adequate enough neighborhood concern about a facility, that might point towards an inadequate buffer. And so I think that might be a focal point to look at.
Thinking through that, Bob, I was just jotting some notes down. So
Yeah.
what determines not what is a buffer area, but what determines what? How does a buffer come into existence? So you have Ohio EPA regulations. You may have zoning regulations.
That's it, right?
The other area I kind of talk about is the natural topography that's already there.
Right.
Topography
Right,
area.
right.
You could have, the facility could have a host agreement with whoever the local governmental agency is,
You're correct.
and then there could be just private agreements that the facility owner has with, even with the surrounding residents.
That's correct.
Businesses or whoever.
And a lot of the buffers happen on that latter point right there, a lot of times. They tend to grow not from the original facility design, but over time with that, agreements with the neighbors over time. And an example is litter fencing. litter fencing has grown in height and width and dimensions over time when we find that they don't catch the litter as adequately as originally designed from the original construction of the facility. So that's a barrier that has changed over time. Sometimes those earthen mounds were originally designed to hide the facility from the neighboring roadways. And when the facility tends to grow, that instead of being a hole in the ground, it tends to grow in height, it no longer hides the facility. And so there may need to be a modification of those earthen mounds, or perhaps fast growth trees to hide the facility from the neighborhood, if possible. So when there's a modification request for a facility, those things should be considered. Those barriers, the buffer barriers, and they're sometimes a distance is a barrier, and sometimes it's a physical buffer as opposed to a distance buffer. For instance, EPA has distance buffers between domiciles. The active space has to be so much of a distance from a domicile, and that distance has changed over time, but that's a regulation from Ohio EPA. But that's not a height difference, that's a distance over land. So I think a little research on that and some thoughts on that from this committee.
So clarify that for me, Bob, exactly what information are you looking for on barriers or buffers?
Well, I'm curious what Ohio EPA requires and whether that is adequate for the situations that are happening within the Hamilton County. And they may very well be adequate, and they may not be. I'd like to see what's happening out there.
And then also, like, along those lines, when they don't follow their own rules, what kind of notification to the public do they get?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
when they issue exemptions.
Yeah, and it's very common to have exemptions to Ohio EPA rules. And are we experiencing those exemptions within the county? Exemptions can happen because of the natural geological formation of the land as the facility is built. It may not be possible from the engineering perspective. But that, was there an alternative proposed?
And I guess, so my question would be, if let's say Ohio EPA says that there must be 1,000 feet between the waste and a domicile, does this rule-making body have any authority to widen that?
Is there a need, and is there an ability to,
Yeah.
if there is a need? Yeah. So I'm looking for, what the rules actually are and what the situations are out there, and how they do apply in the neighborhoods that are affected.
Can we enhance on any particular rules or create a rule? My one big concern is that a rule of not having any detrimental impact on the water streams and creeks, and particularly the Whitewater River, which is the cleanest river in the state of Ohio with exceptional water quality. My business, my industry must keep it that way. I have been advised by Dr. Mike Miller. I don't know, persons here know Dr. Miller, but he is a professor from the Department of Biological Sciences from the University of Cincinnati. He's a board of supervisors of Hamilton County, on the board of supervisors here with the Hamilton County Soil and Water. And he's also the president of Rivers Unlimited, so I work with him closely through Rivers Unlimited. in sharing with him this week, he would really like to see a rule placed on, such as like the landfill should not have any impact on fish and microinvertebrate life through a waterway, which would come from biodiversity monitoring. And I would like to share some of his language because, you know, it's above me. I'll see what you can pass those around. But I do feel if we address anything, one of the main things is protecting the water.
Yeah, so right now, they are allowed,
Great ideas.
so right now, if they are, depending on the rules, if they're allowed to release into the tributaries, can we stop them from releasing into the tributaries? I would like to know if that is within our ability as a rule-making body to stop them from releasing into tributaries.
And for increased monitoring,
Yeah.
he's got some great ideas here with, retention ponds, when to test,
I really like, I would add a point here, from my experience. In the 1980s, and this goes back a ways, from my knowledge of the EPA rules, the city of St. Marys Landfill had to spend millions of dollars creating a barrier between their landfill and the St. Marys River because of impacts on the river. And the first communications, well, it was directly leaching into the river, and it was violating the Clean Water Act. And the first communications from the city of St. Marys was to the Ohio EPA saying, what did we do wrong? We didn't violate any Ohio EPA rules on landfilling. And the answer back was, no, your landfill is not violating any rules. And yet,
Yeah, it was polluted.
yet the source of pollution in the river was directly from the landfill. So the fault lies in the lack of the state regulations on impact on waterways, right there. Now, this was many years ago, and whether the state has corrected the rules or not, I don't know. But the city's impact was several $1 million in putting steel barriers 30 feet down to prevent the leach of the landfill into the St. Marys River. And it was like a 3-year project and very, very expensive, and at the heartbreak of the mayor and the city council and many other people. And a lesson learned. Don't build landfills close to waterways.
And the toe of the proposed future landfill on Bond Road is only 0.4 of a mile from the Whitewater River. It runs right into Fox Run Creek. So
Sharon, thanks for this. I don't let us forget about it, I guess.
I won't.
But I'm gonna also say this, until we can understand what we can do,
Right.
Exactly.
we can discuss a lot of potentials, a lot of past history, but if it's something that the district can't do anything about, we focus our efforts on where can we impact.
Exactly. I had one more note to add on my notes here for today's meeting, and that's leachate containment. And that's probably in your inspection, reports on leachate containment. But I'm curious how that's handled in the reporting and the violation and, corrections.
So, I mean, these landfills are engineered, there's a 3-foot layer of clay, a
Yeah.
recompacted clay that has a very low permeability. It has to be witnessed by an engineer, there's all kinds of document QA, QC that goes into it. On top of that, there's a 60 mil plastic liner, synthetic liner that goes on top of that. So there's a double liner system. The whole landfill is pitched to one sump or several sumps, but then that water, that leachate, is pumped out of the bottom of the landfill and sent either through sewers or trucked to a wastewater treatment plant for treatment. So that water is not discharged. It's recovered and sent for treatment.
That's what I was wondering, if it was ponding and discharged, or if it was sent to the wastewater
The
treatment.
two municipal solid waste landfills do not have, leachate ponds on site.
Okay,
That's more, an arid environment design where you count on evaporation as a means of disposal, basically, in an arid environment. In wet weather, you have to truck it to a treatment plant or transport it somehow.
So Bob, to kind of go off a little more on that, is landfills generate leachate, transfer stations can actually generate leachate, compost facilities.
even recycling centers.
Even recycling centers.
Yeah, aerobic digesters, recycle, all the facilities we talk about, there's waste coming onto a site, it has the potential to generate leachate. And so there's sort of two areas of that and even at landfills, they attempt to minimize the generation to begin with, and then there's a whole containment and management system from collection to its final disposal. And right here in this area, we can't use evaporation ponds, it just doesn't work. Other areas have it, and some landfills will have their own on-site treatment system. Charge may or may not be to
Pleasing to my ears that there's no evaporation ponds. I have seen disasters.
So regarding the leachate, I'm kind of, as we become more informed about like forever chemicals and PFAS, that's concentrated forms in leachate, that, I'm curious, what kind of testing or pre-treatment requirements are there, and are those adequate? Because the material, is going to, a lot of material of the sludge is going to MSD for treatment. But MSD was not designed for 4-inch rains. And so, when there are heavy rains, MSD is not treating that sludge, it's going right to the landfill untreated. So it's kind of this weird system of, they're taking it away, drying it out, and taking it back, but it's not being treated.
Goes straight to the river.
It's going straight to, potentially.
honestly, I don't think that's a topic we could possibly address, because it's in its infancy right now in terms of regulatory programs. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're
Even
absolutely.
backing up from there in terms of even what these chemicals actually are, how they might be treated, and then what the regulatory program. Landfill leachate has been identified as one source. There are, let me put it, thought is everywhere, period. So you're gonna find it in leachate, you're gonna find it in the discharges. You'd probably find it in your own wastewater that comes from your house and gets discharged to a public sewer. So and there's some other chemicals that they're finding out that they're out there, they exist, and they're extremely widespread, and every person, from their own residence is generating some level of that. We could spend a lot of time going down that, but there's still in what I call the discovery research stage, and there's new information coming out every day. I can tell you, based upon some recent experience, even California hasn't figured it out yet.
I understand they're a couple of years off. They're just beginning the testing now of these chemicals, and so they're about 2 years off from actually doing any regulation. So anyway, my concern with this particular committee on the rules is, what are those leachate, requirements and pre-treatment, and is that adequate, considering where it's going? The facility is not designed for these massive rains.
In other words, the landfills that are under our purview are contributing to the problem.
Yeah.
They're a contributor. So, Tony, you're right, it is a huge issue in its infancy, but we're a contributor, so what can we do? What activity
A little bit, I'm not.
can we do? And I don't have an answer to that.
And I don't know whether, because I'm not really sure what pretreatment is required, and
Could there
how
be,
much is going, and, you know.
could there be a treatment, a pre-treatment prior to MSW? And
Can I
that I
interject?
don't have an answer to.
Can I just interject, I'm not the expert on their leachate management system. I mean, that's the surface water, issue. It's an NPDES permit and an arrangement between MSD and Rumpke. But I will say that MSD will stop, Rumpke from discharging if there is a rain event that's coming. They will make them hold that leachate on the facility, and they do have storage capacity.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple million-gallon tanks sitting there for those storm surges, so that they're not sending water that's just gonna get diverted into the river. So there is some limit to that. There is some prevention for that.
Yeah, I'd like to look a little bit into that.
Yeah, we can dive into it further,
Yeah.
but I know that MSD has cut Rumpke off, and they're like, okay, we're storing right now, MSD shut us down. So that's something they have the ability to do with their permit to discharge to MSD.
I know they have a 20-year plan to build storage ponds for that particular purpose, a 20-year plan, and I'm not sure how far advanced they are.
MSD has that. Is that
Yeah,
what you're saying?
MSD,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, Michelle, maybe you can get someone from MSD to our next meeting for these specific questions,
Yeah, yeah.
because
That's
rather than
That's
trying to
good.
research it out, have them, send someone who knows the details on it.
But then again, if we don't have any authority to do anything, if we don't need to deep, then go do 2D.
Yes. And so, let's back up for a minute. So the general areas are, we talked about, basically there's water, air, surface water, there's air, and there's groundwater. All three of those are regulated under Ohio EPA. Actually both under federal and state. So our ability to do anything in addition to what those existing laws do may be restricted. And what I heard you saying is that what we want to know, we want to understand what those regulations are, I guess. How, and I don't know, you say how adequate they are, I
I don't know how to define
don't know
that.
how to define that yet.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly whatever regulatory program there is, whether it's environmental or financial or anything else, could always do more on it, so it's everybody trying to strike a balance.
I think that's our task over the next few meetings, is to define how adequate those rules are.
Yeah, in a little bit of research I have done, I've seen varying requirements from state to state.
That's not been my experience. They seem to be fairly consistent across the U.S. There's different techniques that wind up being used. Traffic locations, different climates. Are there more stringent regulations in California?
Massachusetts.
Well, Massachusetts, I don't know, do they have any landfills left in Massachusetts? I
They
don't
used to,
think so.
but, yeah,
I don't
not
think they
anymore,
do.
they've been,
I don't think so.
yeah.
So, all right, Bob and Sue, did you have anything else?
I think I've run out of questions. I think I look forward to the next meeting. Next steps we have on the agenda here. We also have legal support on the agenda too.
Before we go there, does anyone else have any questions
Yeah.
that are at the table, or maybe online, or?
Well, we're gonna, public
Not-
comment
not
maybe
comments.
last, but,
Okay, but any other questions that are here?
no, Sharon, you have anything?
I feel like some people, that the subcommittee is feeling like maybe we don't have the authority to enforce rules. So just, okay, so we understand we do have the authority, okay. That was just one of my thoughts, so, okay.
I think
Yeah,
the
I
question
feel like-
we're asking is, what's the extent of that authority? Clearly, given the district that, and some districts have instituted some rules and regulations. How extensive is that?
What is the reach?
Yeah, and if we start butting up against or conflicting with other regulatory authorities, whether it's highway EPA or zoning or things like that. The interesting part I found about this was that Michelle presented was that it says that the district could actually override local zoning.
I had read that.
That's very interesting.
Let me put this. I wouldn't want to go to a local government and tell them we're going to override their local zoning. That's a very well-protected,
Touchy subject.
by the local government.
And yet you're referencing four here on.
Yes. So, although I do believe it is limited to townships, if I read this correctly. So it couldn't go into a village or, say, the city of Cincinnati and override theirs and townships. I think these laws and regulations, or these particular ones, as Michelle had said, were put together in the 1980s, and at that time, a lot of townships either didn't have zoning, or zoning was all handled at the county level, historically. So there were probably fewer townships at that time that had their own zoning, all handled by contract. I think by Hamilton County. Legal support, Yvonne, you have any comments you'd like to make?
No, I originally asked Michelle what she meant by that, and I think it was for if there were any specific questions coming out to me. I think we have most of the questions we need. We're gonna get someone from MSD, hopefully next time that person is needed for additional information.
I think it's on one.
So, just the questions that I've starred is, what is the extent of the authority, and is a recycling facility a solid waste facility? Outside of the other kind of smaller follow-up, I'm just wanna make sure that there's nothing I'm missing. There are a lot of stuff, so. The Ohio EPA requirements, so what I'd like to do is get those and send them out in email, so everyone's not trying to Google them and search them.
Yes, that would be
send those
great.
out.
That would be great.
And then I'll reach out to MSD. Can we prevent release to tribute? I guess that falls under what the extent of the authority is.
Right.
Stormwater has to go somewhere. You can't stop the stormwater from discharging from the site, but you can put a permit on it and make sure that they fall within certain parameters, before they discharge that.
Right. And there could be additional, capture requirements on perimeters.
Yes. Mainly stormwater, you're looking at sediment controls to prevent turbid water from being discharged.
Yeah.
Todd, is there anything else you would like to add regarding stormwater?
Well, I think that these types of facilities tend to have industrial regulatory authority under NVDS as opposed to general, which the county permitting system has. So it's kind of a twofold example. Sediment and erosion control to the earthwork regulations that the stormwater conservation district have as part of the stormwater district are going to have some control on this. But generally speaking, these types of industries, not just landfill industries, but other industrial exemptions, industrial permits, kind of coinciding with the general permit. So there's kind of a two-pronged approach that gets looked at in that perspective. Everything I've heard today is on par with the types of controls that we see there. Engineering controls, sediment erosion control fencing, land services, 1 acre is really what triggers general permit, which obviously, depending on the footprint of what's going on there, that would.
To Todd's good point about that there's sort of sediment control, erosion control, flooding as well, or kind of the broader coverage of an environmental aspect of it under. Again, those things go to not just landfills, but applicable to any facility in Lake and some industrial. Michelle, did you have any other questions for the morning?
I have a question. So for the legal support, obviously, we will, request information from NEFOG in her office. Now, we do have the authority, the policy committee does have the authority to reach outside and hire additional, legal advice or opinion. If indeed that NEFOG in her office feels that, that would be in the best interest to do that, is that something that the subcommittee would support?
I would support it if it was recommended.
Okay.
I'm not recommending it, but if it was recommended by your legal support, then yes, I would support it.
And if we get to that point, NEFOG, we can figure out the exact procedures, we have to go through the county to, if that needs to be done, and make that happen.
That's fine.
That all depends on, expertise and where the expertise lies.
There's several people in our office working on different things, so
Yeah.
we're good.
Anything else? If not, schedule probably our next meeting.
Yes.
When I can do another doodle poll.
Yeah, I was just gonna suggest that.
Okay.
I think that's helpful. I need to check my calendar.
Are we gonna try to get back together in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks? What's our?
I think that, we should give it at least 4 weeks if we're gonna try to get some answers to some of these questions. Try to arrange somebody from MSD to be here, that was the other thing.
4 weeks would place it around Thanksgiving. Can we
Yeah, that's what I
do
was
it
just thinking.
before Thanksgiving?
Yeah, let's try to do it before Thanksgiving. Do you feel like 2 hours is an adequate amount of time, or do you want it?
2 hours is
I
good.
think this is good.
And I did have another concerned person want me to address the fact that, they do feel like we should address that any new landfills or expanded landfills, would not be detrimental influence on the environmental justice in the siting of them.
Hang on a minute, we're gonna go in the comment section, and you can read that in as one of the comments from whoever you're doing. And that way, it'll be written out.
What we can look at there.
I'm hopeless about my outlook in front of me.
So the week of, November 22 is Thanksgiving week. I don't need to set a date on this time.
We have one more week in October, and then the first week in November, so technically 3 weeks would be 8th or 15th. No, I'm sorry, November.
Generally agree the week of, actually the week before. But
Will likely be later in that week because we do have a 2-day training, compost training, that week happening here. I will, and we have a policy committee the 17th. But I will put together a doodle poll similar to before, everybody can let me know their.
do we want to attempt to make, on scheduling meetings, do you want to just do it as we go along, or do we want to try to set up a set schedule that 8 or 6 weeks? My suggestion is maybe we hold off on doing a regularly scheduled until we get in.
We need more information on what our authority is before we set a dozen meetings.
Yeah, and since we're getting into the holiday time period, it's hard to set the calendar.
We good? We'll wait for your polling to come out. Right, we're gonna open it up for public comment, and, let's see, my recollection here is that, each participant is allowed up to 2 minutes, and,
Do you wanna let Sharon read hers in first, and she'll
Yeah.
be done with that one?
Yeah, we asked for people to fill out cards. All right, yeah, Sharon, you wanna go ahead and go?
Yeah, my, advisors was through Oxbow, which I'm a member of. They did just want me to mention and address the fact that they would like to see some type of a rule enacted for the detrimental influence on the environmental justice in siting new and expanded landfills. I just wanted to pass that on. That is a concern.
What do they mean by that?
Like say take into the data, the demographic of the area,
Mm-hmm.
of people's age, races, their income, and just take that into the data.
That would be, you know, potentially, if,
Hey,
Roughly where-
Oh.
I'm sorry, let me say it this way, we wanna allow the public to provide comments back, comments, but we don't wanna get into discussion back and forth, or there won't be enough time for the public to make comments. You have anything else, Sharon?
No.
That's it?
Thank you.
All right. I've got, before we go to votes online, I have two,
No, I just wanted to know their intent behind why they said that.
Well, Kirsten, why don't we just hold, we already got an idea.
I know.
Let's move on.
all right, Tim Marr, you wanna, you're limited to 2 minutes, Tim, so,
Challenge.
I know.
First of all, I had not planned to speak. My name is Tim Mara, and I'm here as an observer on behalf of Oxbow Inc. I am a member of the board of directors of Oxbow. That's my capacity. And, I want to make sure you understand that we own approximately like 1,300 acres at the mouth of the Great Miami River. Most of it's on the Indiana side of the border, but we do own land in Hamilton County. And, our preserve is an unusually high-quality preserve. It's mostly floodplain and some people call it swamp. I would call it wetlands, high-quality wetlands. It's an important nature preserve, particularly for migratory birds. Our land abuts land owned by the Hamilton County Park District. It is the Shawnee Lookout Park, and they own extensive conservation easements over farmland along the Great Miami River. The two ownerships, Oxbow and Hamilton County combined, I believe are something like 4,000 acres. And it's an extremely important nature preserve. It's all downstream from the Bond Road site. We are very worried about the impact on this nature preserve. So that's why we're intensely interested. I would urge you in terms of scheduling to move fast to the extent you can, because at some point, if you don't adopt rules regarding expansion of landfills or siting of new landfills, things will happen that you will no longer have the power to create new regulations, new rules regarding them. So you need to make aggressive progress on this subject. I worry when I start hearing about meeting in 4 weeks or 6 weeks, please go faster. The need is more urgent. With regard to the social justice question, I will simply add to that it's increasingly important and concerned that impactful facilities are located near concentrations of people who are disadvantaged either because they're older or because they're minority racial groups or because there are less affluent. And people generally in years past have said, let's put the dump, so to speak, closer to the people who are less affluent. So the subject of social justice just means be cognizant of this happening, and you're not just dumping on people who have very little power. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Carrie Davis?
Anybody on any other public comments?
There may be other people online.
last because I like to let them talk and say their piece.
Well, why don't you make your 2 minutes?
Pardon me?
Why don't you make your 2-minute presentation?
Okay,
I was sent in advance of this meeting something from, Sharon. Did any of you get it? About the her proposed empowering rules? Did you send that to everybody or just me?
I just sent it to you.
Okay. She,
And, OSPO and Rivers
Okay.
Unlimited.
I want to make, I not only did a lot of legal research on this, I also researched process. And the process you're taking is not a good process. It's extraordinarily long. This should be bifurcated into two things. Number one, do you want to empower the Board of Commissioners to approve or disapprove landfills? That doesn't take hardly any research, any work. If you already authorized them, you want to approve them. So the first step of business is to say they are, for now on, the first rule you make is all landfill solid waste facilities or prospective owners must submit their plans. And it's not elaborate language. Everybody uses the language of the statute. You know it's legal because it's the statute. And you say, okay, we're giving this power to the Board of Commissioners. Here's the rule that says everybody has to file plans with them. All the other stuff you're talking about is important. It's very important, every issue brought up by each person. That is a long process, and it's a deep dive, and it's hard work. And that should go and be incorporated into your solid waste planning revisions, you know, and the longer-term meetings. But you need to immediately, I'm surprised that you guys did not say who all wants to empower the Board of Commissioners today to start accepting applications from all facilities. And it could have been passed today, and the board could have approved it next week, okay? Or wait until after the big committee votes. So you're missing a huge, this is the first step. First step is that. Then you do the deep dive into everything else. You should really send this to him, because she told me she worked with OSPO, Rivers Unlimited, talked to dozens of residents. God love her, she talked to me, and you know how I am, everybody. And she put together and sent this to me at like midnight last night. She was up working on this, and I think she must have just chickened out and was a little intimidated. But this is what she wanted you guys to talk about today. And she went through and revised this language to get it exactly what the law said, and she wanted you guys to vote on this today. And then here's at the end of this rule, it always says, you know, that the Board of Commissioners will, and she came up with 16 different items that she wanted the Board of Commissioners to consider whenever an application is put through. That's one rule. It's very clear cut. All these rules, I think, except two, she told me, came from materials that she found. Some of them came from OSPO and other, you know, people, and she put those in there in her priority. But, this is easy.
Yeah,
And as soon as you do it, then we're safe.
Carrie, thank you.
Okay. So I would like you guys to look at that. And for 6 weeks if you should be back here next week to vote on this rule that she proposed.
Brad, are you gonna monitor the?
Yeah, there's, currently no one on Zoom that, wants to provide public.
Someone has it.
Somebody
Oh,
has.
I'm sorry, there is here.
When you, get on, could you identify yourself, your name and your affiliation, because we don't have the ability to do that, in looking at the Zoom screen. Thank you.
It looks like you are unmuted, so go ahead and, state your name.
Hi, my name is Lisa Nguyen. I am working with a group in the area of the Bond landfill. Number one, Ms. Reese was asking about a timeline. She too urged urgency in getting some of these issues addressed. Also, when it comes to the Ohio EPA rules, is there going to be discussion about ramifications when those rules aren't followed? Because currently It's alarming the number of EPA violations that are that have mounted and are ignored. It's just crazy, and I just want to make sure that that is addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. What else you can see for that?
Does not look like anyone else. If anyone else would, well, actually, I see Sally made a comment here. I'm concerned about the issue of dust control that was mentioned earlier. The material used can impact the environment, soil, air, and water. I'm specifically worried that fracking waste can be radioactive and often tainted with PFAS.
We also give time to people call in. I don't know if there's anyone.
Oh, that's true.
Thank you, Sally.
Doesn't look like anybody, there was one, oh, here's one.
There's one number.
So if you are on the phone, it looks like your number ends in 7901. If you hit *6, it will unmute you. You're unmuted on my end if you want to speak.
All right? That's it with that. Motion to adjourn, Sue?
I've got another question. Because of the haste that I'm hearing, what is EPA's timeline moving on the Bond Hill? There's no action that EPA. So there's no action, no changes that are gonna occur in the next 2 months? There's no, request to expand the landfill.
File, once they file, it's over.
So there is nothing.
So there's nothing that's gonna happen between now and the next.
There's nothing that we know of with Ohio EPA.
We ask Ohio EPA if there's anything, or to be notified that if anything comes before them, that we need to act before they approve anything.
Will you take care of that?
Yeah, so you specifically want me to ask them if there's anything happening with the Bond Road landfill? Right.
And the second part.
And notify us if it does,
Could we get on it?
so that we can act quickly if something is coming down.
Also,
The
if
notification
something,
is important.
we would normally get something, division, if something's coming down also. But this will be a second level of,
And is this specific to solid waste, or are you asking for any type of permit for Bond Road?
Any permit for Bond Road.
Okay.
All Drumkey has to do is file for a permit and it's done. Done.
Robin, do anything else? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Thank you. We're adjourned.
Yes, hi.
I'm the reconstruction here, folks. And, we obviously have that understanding.
Yeah, thank you, Tommy, appreciate it.
Does, and that's things that come